Hello, my name is Ian Hodgins. I'm a GP. I'm a trustee of Fore Park Cemetery, Plymouth. One of my passions is Victorian local history, and I want to give this talk, which I've entitled Darling Buds of Devonshire, Life and Career of a Victorian Doctor. Now, the talk is based on one man called John Retford Budd, who was a Plymouth doctor who was active from 1830 to 1860. Most of the information and text comes from Reverend Sabine Baring Gould, an Anglican priest, antiquarian, novelist, folk song and story collector. And I'll be quoting him for much of this lecture. But first of all, I want to talk about John Budd's family. His father, Samuel Budd, was educated at Truro Grammar School. Samuel settled as a doctor in North Houghton in Devon, and there brought up his 9 sons, intending that all of them would go into the medical profession. Quoting from Sabine, "Rarely has a whole family proved so able, and what is more, proved the excellence of home education, where the father is competent to give it. Samuel Budd, the surgeon of North Houghton, managed to teach his 9 sons himself, in the intervals of his professional calls. And he taught them so well that none of his sons failed to make his mark in the world. 7 of his sons entered the medical profession. John Redford, the subject of this memoir, was the eldest son, born in 1804, practiced in Plymouth, and died the 11th of November 1873. Samuel was born 1805, became a member of the College of Physicians in 1859, died at the age of 79. Richard was born April 1809, again became Fellow of the Royal College of Physicians, this time in 1863, and died in 1896. George was born, you see how this is going, George was born 1809, Fellow of the Royal College in 1841, died 1882. William will be mentioned later. And then came Christian Budd of North Houghton, Thomas Septimus Budd, and then the other sons were Charles Octavius, Fellow of Pembroke College, and Francis Nonus. If you can note that actually all these second names now are the Latin numbers. Francis Nonus, born 1823, Fellow of Trinity College, a call to the bar, and in fact it's these last 2 who are the black sheep of the family that decided to go into law and practice as barristers rather than the honourable profession of medicine. I'm afraid we don't know a great deal about the daughter of the family. It's quite typical. Catherine, except that she was the firstborn and lived to the age of 35. Now I want to talk about the way in which these boys were educated. Now, all the medics of the family followed the pattern, being educated at home, then gaining entrance to either Cambridge or Edinburgh University to study medicine. The first year at medical school would consist of learning classical literature and then reading Galen in the original Latin. Now, Galen was 2nd century Greek physician to Emperor Marcus Aurelius. His ideas and theories were highly revered for the next 1,700 years, although by the early 19th century they were getting to be thought to be a little outdated, as you would expect. As well as reading Galen, our medical students would learn physiology and anatomy from dissection. Incidentally, all the sons, apart from possibly Thomas Septimus Budd, studied anatomy before the 1832 Anatomy Act, so probably all dissected grave-robbed bodies. Following Cambridge, each of the students would spend time in hospital, mostly the Middlesex Hospital, and then did an apprenticeship before going to their final exams. At least 3 of them, and possibly John Retford Budd, spent additional time walking the wards of the Parisian hospitals. Now, this is a fascinating time in the history of medical education. The revolutionary period in France saw the creation of new hospitals and an improved form of medical education. For the first time, young doctors were encouraged to examine their patients. There was also a new emphasis on learning from experience rather than assumed medical knowledge. Hence the mantra of the teaching hospitals was, "Learn nothing from books and everything from experience." A typical day consisted of the following. Ward rounds would begin at 7:30, and what your medical student would do was present patients that were admitted the day before. Presentations would consist of recounting the symptoms the patient had and the examination findings made. Then the consultant would examine the patient, and this would lead to discussion. All discussions and communications were in Latin, and the reason for this was that many people came in and of completely different nationalities. So there were Americans, there were Germans, there were Russians, there were Polish. At 11:30 a.m. the lecture of the day was usually on the subject brought up in that morning's ward rounds. In all of this, the emphasis was to diagnose your patient. Diagnosis was the thing. There was little in the way of treatment for any of these conditions, so most patients that were admitted died. At 1 p.m, post-mortems would begin, mostly on patients presented on one of the previous week's ward rounds. Here, the student professor would compare their findings with what actually was going wrong in the patient. Now, from Paris, I want to bring you back to Devon, where most of the buds practice. Now, Sabine Baring-Gould, the author of biography, gives examples of patient stories to paint the characters that were involved. And this one just shows how many buds there were practicing in Devon. Buds everywhere. Dr. John Budd would attend the workhouse to see the sick there. One day the master said to him, "Oh, there is Josie here again. He pretends that he's double up with lumbago or something of that sort. The fellow, I believe, is a malingerer. He hates work, and he loves to be in the infirmary and have extra rations." "I'll deal with him," said Bud. He was shown to the ward where Josie lay groaning and crying out. "Where is it, man?" said the doctor. "Oh, sir, cruel pains right here across my belly. I can't walk, I can scarce breathe. Oh," and he began to howl. "I must examine your back," said the doctor. "You must be placed on the table and your spine bared." So the moaning rascal was placed face down on the board and his hands and his feet tied. He didn't like that. He said it hurt him cruel bad, but it had to be done, and he was stripped to the waist. "I'll try games balls on him," said Dr. Budd. The fellow, looking out of the corner of his eye, saw an apparatus introduced, a couple of large iron balls like leather bullets, with handles to them. Then a spirit lamp was lit, and the balls were heated in the flame. "Oh, I think I feel easier now, sir," said Josie, who didn't relish the preparation. "But we're going to make you quite well," said the medical practitioner, and flung his legs across Josie's hams and sat astride him, and signalled to the assistant to hand him the heated balls. With these he began to pound the patient in the middle of the back. And they were not red hot, but very nearly so. And the purpose of the application was to raise round blisters. And Josie yelped. "Take it patiently," said Blood. "It will do you good. Now go and heat the balls again." Further dabbing with the implement, vociferous yells from the patient. "I am well. I have no more pain. Have mercy on me." At last he was disengaged and sent back to bed. Next day, away went Josie, blistered in the back. Not another visit to the doctor would he abide, nor did he appear again in the Plymouth workhouse. The man was well known elsewhere, as the masters had communicated with the other heads of workhouses in Devon. A few weeks later Josie turned up in Newton Abbot and applied for admission to the workhouse. He was suffering badly, very badly, with spasms of the heart. He was taken to the infirmary and at once recognised and the surgeon called for. "Humph," said the medical man. "This is a case for Cairns Bournes. I've heard from him, from Dr. Budd." "I'll be shot if you try them on me again," roared Josie. "Oh, let me go. I'm better. No, I am well." He was dismissed. About a fortnight later he appeared at the Exeter workhouse, with his leg contracted, tottering, and scarce able to walk. He was put into the infirmary. And said the master, "There's a more serious case than is apparent. We must send for Dr. Budd." There was a Dr. Budd in Exeter then. "Budd, Budd," shouted the man. "I'll have no Budds about me. Let me go. My leg is well." One day in North Taunton, a man, doubled up with pain and reeling in his walk, applied at several houses for relief. "Got some coppers?" and came with a respectable house of an evidently well-to-do man and rang the bell. The servant at once opened and asked what he wanted. He stated his case and his need of help. "Well, I'll go and call Dr. Budd," said the maid. "Budd here, Budd there, Budds everywhere. I'm going to be off." And he, completely cured, went away the sick man as hard as his legs could carry him. Whether he became a steady working man, or whether he fled the county in the region of Budds to malinger elsewhere, was never known, but the Devon workhouses saw him no more. Here I want to move to William Budd, who was probably the most famous Budd. He was born in 1811, died in 1880. On one occasion, typhoid broke out in North Taunton and caused many deaths. Dr. Budd at once divined the cause. Indeed, he was the first man to thoroughly trace the fever to its source, and he persisted in his urgency to have the water supply thoroughly overhauled, succeeding to put a stop to the fever. He published a work on typhoid fever in 1873 and proved beyond dispute how it was originated, how it communicated, and how alone it could be stopped. When the terrible rinderpest, which is a cattle plague, broke out in England in 1866, Budd was loud in his recommendations for a poleaxe and a pot of quicklime as a solution, and although derided at first, this view was ultimately successfully adopted. This, incidentally, is very similar to the management of the cholera outbreak in Nos Mayo 17 years before. Sabine Baring-Gould gave us an idea of the real John Retford Budd. He was a tall, heavy-built man with a full, high-coloured face, not intellectual in appearance, and with a warm brown hair and side whiskers. He also paints a story of a rough-mannered man, very blunt to the point, someone who doesn't take fools gladly. He paints Budd as a brilliant medical man of his time. Here I want to start and look at some of the stories about the man. Now, before I start, I want to throw in a disclaimer. Many of the stories are quite humorous. Many depict him to be the brilliant man. But many don't show the patient in such good light. And many of the things he did would either be frowned upon now or lead to his instant removal from the medical register. But let's start with one of his successes. Mrs. Carmody was in a very poor way. The doctors had bled her and allowed her only slops, and the poor lady was reduced to death's door. As a last resort, Dr. Budd was called in. "Chuck those slops away and chuck the doctors after them with their pills and their lances," roared Budd. "Give her 3 or 4 cases of champagne a day, a bowl of beef tea every 3 hours, beef steaks, mutton chops and oysters." In fact, Dr. J. W. Budd broke through the wretched system that prevailed of bleeding and giving lowering diet for every kind of malady, which was the system of the day.